Imagine the silence. Every other human has vanished. The cities, farms, and hospitals sit completely frozen in time, but the streets are entirely empty. Welcome to this explainer, where we're exploring repopulating Earth, the ladder of risk. Today, we're setting aside all those dramatic Hollywood storylines, and we're looking squarely at the harsh biological and mathematical realities of starting over. We are going to map out the exact human minimum required to survive the apocalypse. Now, it's the ultimate high-stakes thought experiment, right? Just imagine a desolate planet where only one fertile man and one fertile woman remain. They've got shelter, they've got canned food, and they have the terrifying realization that the entire future of Homo sapiens is now, well, their personal group project. So, the big question we have to ask, is 2 really enough to save us? Section 1. The Adam and Eve Myth. Okay, let's dive straight into this. Biologically speaking, yes, a single couple could technically produce children. The first generation might even look perfectly healthy. But while 2 humans could produce a child, they would also be setting the stage for one of the absolute most perilous family reunions in human history. Because, once those kids grow up, they have to reproduce too. Section 2, the genetics of inbreeding. Suddenly, every possible partner is a sibling. And the generation after that? You're looking at first cousins, nieces, nephews. As we start looking at the actual genetics here, the math gets incredibly grim, incredibly fast. Within a surprisingly short amount of time, the human family tree would completely stop resembling a tree, and it would start to look a lot more like a badly tangled genetic fishing net. To understand why this is literally a species-ending problem, we have to talk about what biologists call inbreeding depression. Every single one of us carries genetic variants that are usually harmless because they're recessive, meaning their effects just stay hidden as long as you have one healthy copy of the gene. But close relatives share a massive amount of the exact same DNA. So when they reproduce, the chance of a child inheriting 2 faulty copies of the exact same rare gene skyrockets. This leads to a massive, broad decline in fitness. We're talking reduced fertility, pregnancy loss, and a really dangerous concentration of genetic disorders that had literally been invisible for generations. And hey, we don't just have to guess about this. History actually proves it. On the Pingalap Atoll in Micronesia, a devastating 18th century typhoon reduced the population to roughly just 20 survivors. The population eventually recovered its numbers, which sounds like a win. But one of those original survivors carried a rare recessive variant for complete colorblindness. Because the founder group was so incredibly tiny, that hidden gene was amplified. Eventually, 1 in 10 descendants on the atoll suffered from complete colorblindness, compared to just a tiny, tiny fraction in normal populations. That is the genetic gamble of a tiny survivor group. Moving on to Section 3, counting the real founders. This brings us to a super foundational concept in population genetics. If we actually want to know what it takes to save humanity, we have to realize that the sheer number of warm bodies in a room is not what saves a species. Scientists measure survival viability very differently than just, doing a head count. We absolutely have to separate the census population size from the effective population size. The census size is just the head count. If 100 people survive, your census is 100. But the effective size is the number of individuals actually passing their genes to the next generation. Humans aren't breeding livestock that you can just manage on a spreadsheet. In reality, some survivors are going to be infertile, some will be too old, and some simply will choose not to have children because they just don't want to. Let's just picture a group of 100 survivors. If 40 of them are children, 20 are older adults, and 10 are injured or ill, you are left with just 30 adults of reproductive age. And if the male to female ratio is uneven, well, your effective genetic pool shrinks even further. A settlement of 100 people might honestly only provide a few dozen actual genetic contributors, which makes the whole community incredibly fragile. To put some actual guardrails around this fragility, conservation biologists have long referenced the 5,500 rule. It's a really well-known rule of thumb suggesting you need an effective population size of roughly 50 just to limit the most severe short-term inbreeding. But to preserve long-term evolutionary potential, to actually adapt to new diseases and shifting environments, you need an effective population of around 500. And remember, to get 500 effective breeders, your actual census population of living, breathing humans would need to be much, much higher. Section 4, the extinction vortex. Let's move up that ladder of risk to populations of a few dozen or even 100. Because even before genetics become a problem, there are invisible threats that can strike a small population and just wipe them out completely. This is about pure catastrophic bad luck. So, the absolute crucial point here is demographic stochasticity. I know, it's a huge mouthful, but it's really just a complex term for a simple, terrifying concept: random variations. Look, in a population of millions, unusual outcomes just average out. But in a population of 40, one string of bad luck is completely fatal. What if a generation produces almost entirely boys? What if an accident kills the only 3 women of childbearing age? What if a disease takes out the only trained midwife? In an instant, expertise and future births vanish together. And when that bad luck hits a small group, it triggers what's called the extinction vortex. It goes like this. First, you start with a small population. By pure chance, you lose key individuals, which leads straight into step 2, inbreeding and a loss of diversity. This reduced genetic health then triggers step 3, a broad decline in overall health and fertility, which means, tragically, your population gets even smaller in step 4, making the random bad luck and the inbreeding hit even harder the next time around. It's this terrifying feedback loop where recovery eventually becomes biologically impossible.
Section 5. Rebuilding a civilization. Up to this point, we've only really talked about keeping DNA alive, but human beings do not survive in a vacuum. To actually repopulate the Earth, we have to shift our thinking from biological minimums to the massive societal requirements needed to keep a post-apocalyptic settlement functioning at all.
I absolutely love this point from the source material. We so often imagine survivors just, heading to the local library or downloading a Wikipedia archive to rebuild the world. But as they point out, a textbook can explain surgery without giving anyone the judgment or the muscle memory to actually perform it. A manual can diagram a water turbine, sure, but it can't give you the tactile ability to machine replacement bearings. Knowledge on a page is utterly useless without the living specialists who actually hold the practical experience. Just think about the sheer web of specialists required for baseline modern survival. You need mechanics, farmers, chemists, logisticians, and absolutely crucial here, obstetricians and midwives. Because let's not forget, before modern medicine, childbirth was devastatingly fatal. A technically perfect genetic colony will still entirely collapse if nobody knows how to safely separate drinking water from sewage. You could have the most pristine DNA on Earth and still lose your entire colony to a localized outbreak of diarrhea. Redundancy is the entire plan.
So let's quickly summarize this ladder of risk we've been climbing. If you have just 2 survivors, you are facing certain genetic and demographic catastrophe. 100 effective breeders gives you a short-term buffer, but man, the community is balancing on a knife's edge. 500 to 1,000 breeders makes long-term genetic health biologically plausible. But if you truly want a durable, skilled society with the vital redundancy needed to absorb bad luck, you really need 10,000 or more diverse people. The absolute biological minimum is shockingly small, but the responsible minimum demands tens of thousands.
The entire core message of this explainer is perfectly captured right here. Repopulating the planet is not just about creating as many babies as possible. It's about creating a world in which those babies can survive long enough to choose lives of their own. It is really about passing an entire functioning ecosystem through a keyhole. Genes absolutely must pass through, but so must skills, culture, and the willingness to cooperate. Which leaves us with a deeply personal question to ponder. If humanity was reduced to a single settlement, and survival demanded far more than just your DNA, what irreplaceable skill would you bring to the table? Are you the mechanic, the social organizer, the farmer? Because repopulating Earth wouldn't rely on one heroic couple. It would rely on a society organized well enough to survive its own smallness. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll leave you to think about exactly what role you'd play at the end of the world.